吃不透不吐不透皮. How do you know all this?
I speak to the propagandists and they have
they have it all. Yeah, okay. Well, that's about up. My time's about up now. I think I'll have to leave.
That's David Moser, sinologist, linguist, jazz pianist, and author of A Billion Voices, China's Search for a Common Language. David is currently an associate professor at Beijing Capital Normal University, and we met in Columbus, Ohio at the annual AS conference, where I got to learn about David's legendary stories of building jazz in China, performing Xiangsheng on Chunwan, presenting on Chinese national TV, and continuing his love of Beijing. This is arguably the most fun and entertaining show I've done so far with Peking Hotel, so I hope you like it as much as I do. Welcome to the podcast, Lao Mo.
Thank you. My pleasure.
There's so much that we can talk about and so many little rabbit holes that we can get into. But why don't we unwind ourselves, take ourselves all the way back to 1999. The new spring of the Chinese New Year, the biggest event in the China-speaking world, the New Year Festival Gala, the 春节晚会. You were waiting just before getting onto the stage, the third act of the night. The military band just performed before you guys.
亲爱的观众朋友们，我们几位在这儿给您拜年了。
Four of you foreigners waiting just next to the stage with the whole world watching, a billion people waiting to find out what they're about to witness. I mean, how are you feeling?
我叫莫大伟，我来自美国。
Well, I mean, of course, you said it. How could you feel but nervous? I mean, you're about to, maybe not 1 billion that night, but by the time every Chinese person in the world saw it, then it would be well over 1 billion people, right? But what you don't know is that we had rehearsed the script so many times that we could probably just do it in our sleep, because the Chunwan is not kidding around. Like, it's a really serious thing. And we didn't really realize what we were getting into when we agreed to do it. But we thought, this is a good opportunity. And, one of the people, of course, in the foreigners in the group was Da Shan.
我叫大山，我来自加拿大。
And just being on stage with him, would boost our visibility.
I mean, he's to this day still the most famous foreigner.
Oh yeah, still
in China.
Well, I'm not so sure. No. For that generation, still is. But I think when I talk to my young students, they don't know who he is. So a whole generation has lost that memory, right? Anyway, but what we didn't know is, I thought maybe we would just rehearse a few times, maybe at somebody's house or somewhere, and then go and then, maybe a few days, do some dress rehearsals. No, I mean, they want you there every day, or not every day, but every week, many times for a month. I mean, you spend your whole time in CCTV, back in the old CCTV building, all day long, just sitting there and waiting for your turn, right? So you're sitting there and it's very boring and everyone's smoking and waiting and eating what they call herfan, Yes. It's pretty good. It's okay. It's edible, but it's this, what do you call it? It's in a styrofoam box, and it's like mass produced. Right. What do you call it? I don't know.
I don't know. It's takeaway before takeaway.
Food. Yeah, right. And after a few days of that, you're just like, oh God, you can't leave. You can't leave. So we spent, every week, several times rehearsing it. So I wasn't really too nervous that I might miss my lines or something like that. What I was more nervous about is that there should be technical problem, like a microphone, quit or something. But I don't know if have you been in the CCTV building at all, or any of those CCTV buildings?
I've actually been to one. When I was a kid, there was a show that needed an audience, and who else to be the audience than the little kids in Beijing. So right. I was there once.
Yeah. Well, when you go there, you see, it's guarded like an army base. Really, they have soldiers out there and everything. It's like a military base almost. So it's not easy to go in and out. You got to have a pass or something like that. Yeah. So that process was pretty tiring, but also was very frustrating because this was all new to me. I mean, I'd never done anything like this before. I'd been on TV shows before,
of course,
but not something such a big one. So the one thing is you rehearse, and then they do a full, I guess you could call it a dress rehearsal, but they were calling what do they call it? A
Taipai?
No, yeah, not as it's a Taipai, but it's to 录一个背什么带背保带 or something like that.
备份带
备份带, yeah, something like that. So
like a backup recording.
A backup recording, that's what we call it. Yeah, right. So they want a full performance timed down to the second, so that if something happens on the night of the live broadcast, like somebody breaks their leg, or somebody pulls out a banner that says "Free Tibet" or some horrible thing that happens, right? Then they want to be able to plug in the recording from the previous night.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah, so that no one at home will know.
Interesting.
So it could be, let's say someone does get sick, or suddenly something goes wrong. They say, okay, plan B, and then they can just punch in, I guess. I don't know how they do it, but punch in.
So you actually pre-perform the whole thing before the day.
That's right. You have to do it once and do it for real, because that might be the actual one that they use, right? So you twice the work, more work than you thought, But then also, and I didn't know this either, that it's not a matter of writing the script and then it's approved and then you rehearse and then not that simple. The script gets written, and then of course they have to approve it.
Who are they?
That's a good question. Who are they? You never meet them,
right?
But it's them, and it's the Shenchabu,
of course.
Right? Of course. So this script was written by I can't remember who, someone who's in the area of Chuyi, the folk arts group, like Kwaibar, Xiangsheng, all that. I can't remember his name. It's been too many years. I used to know him pretty well. I'm forgetting his name, but he wrote the script. And then my teacher, my crosstalk, my Xiangsheng teacher, Ding Guangquan, was the director. So because all four of us were his students. So Dashan was a student. Dashan did not actually take Ding Laoshi as Ding Guangquan as his formal Xiangsheng teacher. He actually, a Xiangsheng student has so he actually chose Jiang Kun because he was more famous. But really, it was Ding Laoshi was his real teacher.
Okay.
Jiang Kun didn't really teach him very much. So we had to, each time we rehearsed the script, and then when we would memorize it and work it out pretty well, then we would have to perform it for I don't know who they are, but the Shenchabu, in a little auditorium with maybe 10 or more people. I think they all must be in the party in the CCTV Communist Party office or something like that. But then they have to watch it, and then they can sort of contribute their comments or objections. You shouldn't say that. Don't stress this. This is not funny, or And these are not experts in TV. They're just ideologues, right? So each time we would have that, there were changes in the script. And so we would have to start all over and add some things, and I don't know how many times, at least 5 times that we had to do this. Each time we had to revise the script. So, and we became to realize that each time the script was revised, it became less funny. And it became more and more. I wish I'd kept the original script, because it was actually kind of funny. It was creative and it was interesting, but every time we revised, it became more and more foreigners competing with each other to say how much they loved China.
Right.
I mean, it was like literally, no, I love China more than you do. No, I love China. Almost literally that, by the time we got to the 5th iteration, So by this point, Ding Guangquan, the director and the scriptwriter, were frustrated and just wanted to just give up, because they put so much work into it and they just kept changing it, and it was no longer very funny. So we came up with something because the ending is very important for Xiangsheng. You have to have the very last line is like they have lots of baofu or these jokes, baofu, and then there has to be a di, it's the resolution or something at the end. And so they couldn't really find anything very well. So what they thought was, let's have a reason like these four foreigners, because they love Chinese culture and everything, and they want to perform the old ladies in the hutongs then would do this Niu Yenge. That usually had drums, boom, 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 boom,
Right, like a 广场舞kind
yes,
of.
it's like the Guangchang Wu. Yeah, it's the original Guangchang Wu, right? But it was this fixed thing, and they called it Niu Yang. It's kind of dance.
Yeah.
And they said, why don't we have these four foreigners that are men? And usually it's a woman that does it, right? But so we did this, and we got these flags or what do we call them? Cheese, and did a thing. And of course, we did it badly. And it was but everyone said, that is funny. I mean, the audience will love that because it's so incongruous. It's weird, but silly. I mean, why would four foreigners doing this dance, And everyone said, that's a great ending. That'll be great, right? So then we went to the final shencha, and somebody, I remember it was an old woman, it must be in her 70s or something, and I think we overheard her song, but she said, 那是个老外，那个牛烟哥。这个不好看，不地道. It was not very. It was not. They were. The way they do it is not authentic.
But that's the whole point.
Right. Of course, the whole point. The joke is that it's not authentic, right? So this one knew nothing about entertainment. We should just thought, or maybe she thought the Yanga is a sacred dance and you shouldn't let people make fun of it. So then now what are we going to do? Because we no longer had that funny ending, right? So I think they just gave up, and I don't even remember. You watched it, right? I don't know how it ended, but we had to all recite some kind of poem or something. I don't even remember what it was, because they just whatever, just get an ending right. When it aired live, and we finished, and I went out, waiting for the taxi, and my friends started to call me. They said, "Hey, Dao Wei, 我看你的Chunwan." But then they would say, 你知道吗？你这个节目。不太好，不好玩。
Really?
They would tell me.
Harsh.
They would be, they were real honest. Well, they were real honest with me. These are good friends, right? So they wouldn't lie to me. They said, 你的那个节目是最差的, right?
哎呦.
So, but I knew that anyway. I mean, I said, yeah, I know. So that was my first experience with it. And by the way, I think it was the next year, they wanted to invite us on again.
Oh.
And guess what? We all said no. We said absolutely not. We went through it once. It was fun, but we don't want to do that again.
But the live reception in the audience was pretty, positive.
Of course,
clapping and laughing.
The live audience, yeah. I mean, but they're clapping at anything. I mean, I don't know if they really liked it or not, right? And also, the camera will focus. Will focus on the people that are smiling and laughing, right? So you're not going to see the people that are sitting there. Looking at their cell phone or something. No, I mean, I think, no, I may be exaggerating, probably most people didn't pay much attention to it. They thought, it's cute, it's funny, it's all right.
I mean, I guess, the idea behind the Xiangsheng, in some sense, is that the ideologues, the censors, the propagandists have a conception of, the good foreigner, right? The good foreigner who learned Chinese properly, who love the Chinese culture,
right.
who have Chinese wives, who dress up in a Chinese gown, and they perform xiangsheng. That's the good foreigner, and in some sense that is their assigned role to you guys.
That's right, exactly right. And we knew that, of course. I mean, it's very obvious that you're right. It's like the good foreigner who loves China. I mean, you get so used to that. I mean, almost everything you do has something of that flavor in it, right? Even when they invite you on a show to talk about something, you'll always get some question, or not so much now necessarily, but back then really it was kind of a special thing for a foreigner to come on, especially if they spoke Chinese. Yeah. And then of course how do you like China? What do you think? And it's a propaganda thing, but it's understandable. They want to present foreigners who are well disposed to China, and it's easy for us because we in fact did like China, and we did enjoy Chinese culture,
and you did speak Chinese very well.
And we did, yeah. So,
and you have a long history of studying Chinese. I mean, you actually started as a music major.
That's
I
right.
think, and you spent a few years in Boston playing trumpet and recording music and doing many different things.
That's right.
Until you sort of hit on this thing called the Chinese language.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Somehow you got overtaken.
Yeah, that's right. Where did you have you been talking to my mother? How do you know all this?
Well, I speak to the propagandists, and they have a file.
Oh, they have it all.
Yeah, that's
okay.
right.
Well, that's about up. My time's about up now. I think I'll have to leave. I was a music major, and I was so sure my future was going to be in music, and even since high school, I played guitar. I was in a rock band, and I wanted to be a composer and all this kind of stuff. But it's a funny thing. You never know what it is you really are passionate about. Sometimes you just discover that for some reason you just seem to always be, interested in something, spending your time doing it. But you may not think, oh, I could do a career out of this, or this could be something I could be my life occupation or something. You don't think of it this way, but I was always interested in language. I always found it fascinating, and I spent a lot of time on my own just studying it. And I think I was also curious about China because my parents were very unusual. They were very, very typical Midwesterners, like here we are in the Midwest, and they were just not many foreigners back then in a small town in Midwestern United States. Yeah, but my mother was just the sweetest person in the world, and I think it was the church she went to or something. There was someone who was a dean of the local college, and they said, every year at Christmas, all the American students go home for Christmas, and the foreign students that can't go home are stuck in their dorm rooms, and they're lonely, and sometimes they're upset, and they might even, try to commit suicide, because it's a very lonely time at Christmas, And so they said, if you could invite them, some of these students, invite them into your home for dinner, Christmas dinner, and let them share, learn a little bit about Christmas, just so they have something, that makes them feel wanted and that they're not so lonely. So my mother did that, and she was wonderful. She was such a nice person, and my mother, and I'm not objective, but I think she really was a very unusually generous person. And so she invited them into her home, and this included 2 women from Taiwan who were studying there, and she liked them so much that she said, "We have an empty room. Why don't you just live in our house?" So there were 2 Taiwanese graduate students, I guess, living in our home when I was in high school. I was in high school, I think. So, what year would that be? I don't know, 1970 maybe, something like that. Back then, no PRC students really. Most of them from Taiwan or Hong Kong, right? But anyway, to make a long story short, I found, I actually thought, I'd learn a little bit of Chinese, and I found it really interesting. I had no idea about tonal languages and tones and everything. But but they thought this was very funny, and so I said, teach me some Chinese. So the first Chinese I ever learned was not ni hao or chilima or anything like that. The first Chinese I ever learned was chi pu tao bu tu pu tao pi. Bu chi pu tao tao. Now, why is that? They thought it would be so funny to have a novice foreigner who'd never spoken any Chinese just to learn this tongue twister.
Tongue twister, yeah.
And I must have said it really badly. It must be hilarious. And they recorded it on a cassette tape. And it was so funny to them. They actually sent this cassette tape to Taipei, to someone they knew who had a radio show. And I never heard this, but evidently they played this tape of me doing Chupataupi for Taiwan radio.
Wow. This is like TikTok before TikTok. Yeah. With a short clip going viral.
I would love to have a recording of that radio show.
I'm sure it's somewhere.
Yeah, it must be in the archives somewhere, right? But so that was the first time I learned it. But I was always interested in this, but for me it was like, this is just interest. It's a hobby. I'm still going to be a musician or anything like that, right? So because I was a music major, I was at Indiana University in the music department, and there was a professor there named Doug Hofstadter who wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book on AI, the first one, a very important book. And he found out from his colleagues that a Beida translation team was working on translating his book into Chinese. And he said, I don't trust them. The book is too complicated. I'm sure they're missing some things and it's going to be a lousy translation. And he basically said, I'm sending you to Beijing and take part, because he knew I was studying Chinese on my own. I was just an amateur. I was actually meeting up with Chinese people and trying to speak Chinese in my spare time, right? So he said, I want you to go to Beida and work on the translation project. So I said, wow, what a weird opportunity. Yeah, why not? Yeah. So I thought it would be like a semester or a year, have an interesting life, and then come back home, right? That was where my real involvement in China and Chinese was that.
And it turned into a 30-year, 40-year journey.
Right. So and so once I was there and I saw, and this was 改革开放, the most exciting.
This would be 1987, 86?
Yeah, 86, yeah, exactly, yeah. By that time I knew a little bit more about China, that's for sure. Before you were even born, but it really and truly, it was a very exciting time. Even if you didn't know anything about China, you just could just feel it. Everyone was so optimistic. And
so if you were to compare Taipei and Beijing in the 80s, were they similar? Were they very different?
Very different, yeah, very different, yeah. Taipei was, at that time, I guess you'd say much more advanced in many ways, but it was all horribly polluted. They had motorcycles that were, running on very dirty gasoline. People wearing, eye patches and things because, there was so much pollution in the air that it would just eat away the cornea of your eye. Like kids were wearing eye patches and people were masked. Pollution was awful.
Sounds like Beijing 20 years later.
That's right. It's more like Beijing 20 years later. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, Beijing's totally different. Totally different. I actually, so I had a little bit of time to prepare. And one of the things I read was Orville Schell's book in the People's Republic. Orville Schell, and there was another one. He had another book.
To get rich is glorious.
Yeah, To Get Rich is Glorious, right. So those were my textbooks to understand, and they were great. By the way,
yeah.
Like Orville Schell, if you're listening, that was a great preparation because he introduced you to a lot of very important cultural aspects, such as Lei Feng. Right, told you, this is Lei Feng, this is how it works, this is why they have Lei Feng Day, and blah, blah, blah. Things like that, which you wouldn't know unless you had been there. And he also was, very linguistically oriented, and, obviously that was important to him. So he was kind of my role model. That said, like, well, yeah, maybe I could be something like that.
And so you read Orville, and you had this translation work. Actually, the book was already translated back in 1984, I think.
No.
As part of the 走向未来, Chengfu.
Oh, that's not the translation of the book, though.
I mean, that's like a fifth of the book.
Not even that.
No?
It's a introduction to the book. It's a rephrasing. I think they may have translated some of the dialogues word for word.
But I mean, point is,
it's only about a 70-page book,
right?
And it was mostly like, here's Gödel's theorem, here's what he talks about.
Yeah.
But that series was very, very influential.
Exactly. I mean, it's such a eye-opening piece, a series of books and introductions.
Yeah, I
actually
bought some of those because some of those are on sale. And those were really, though they were very short, concise. But it's just a compendium of all the sort of new ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so going to China in 1986 and working on this stuff, did you sense there's a general curiosity of the world outside China from the Chinese folks on campus, in the society? I mean, what's the environment? What is the atmosphere around you?
You mean the curiosity of the Chinese or the curiosity of the foreigners?
The Chinese, as you went to Beijing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was mostly interacting with the graduate students, but I mean other people too, and they were totally obsessed, totally. I mean, so curious, had such curiosity, always getting questions. But on the other hand, they also did know actually quite a bit. There was a sort of mania for books, famous books from outside. That's one of the reasons why this book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, that my friend wrote, Douglas Hofstadter wrote. Intellectuals were intensely curious about the newest things and AI was one of them. Computers, and but they were sort of naive. I would get very naive questions.
Okay.
Like things like, when in America, when children finish high school and then they leave home to go to college and they, create a life for themselves, when they go back home, do the parents charge them rent? And they really believe this, that in American culture, when you go out to parents and say, okay, you can come home, but you have to give us rent, right?
My grandma always said it. That,
really?
yeah,
See?
the American charge their kids rent.
Yes, that comes somehow. That piece of bullshit was in the air at the time.
Yes.
What were some other things? I can't remember. Some just absolutely ludicrous. But one of the things I would tell them is that if you don't understand religion, you don't really understand the U.S. That was something they had no idea. When I would mention how religiosity and basically Christianity was such a linchpin of American life, and they would say, "Oh, really? They had no idea. I never saw a movie that talked about that or an American book."
Right.
And to this day, I think most Chinese.
Religion has been deliberately erased from the public life of China. So
that's right. But it was funny because I was translating this book that had lots of a very American sorts of references in the book, and it was funny what they would know and what they wouldn't know. One of the translators said he was reading Kafka. He said, Kafka, yeah, it's great, And then, it said something rather than we mentioned. I said, well, you might as well be Santa Claus. He said, who? I said, how can you know Kafka and you don't know Santa Claus? I mean, this is.
And these are translators.
These are translators.
They're supposed to know, the English word better than everyone else in China.
That's right. Or you would have other things like, he talks about, a father. This wasn't the book, it was another book he was translating, but this is the father gives his daughter his Visa to take to the mall. And of course, it's a Visa credit card, right? Okay. But my friend was asking me, why in the United States does a daughter have to take a Visa to the mall to buy things? I mean, and there were things like that were just completely. And of course, there were mentions of Gestalt therapy and all kinds of things. Some of them were very funny, like a fortune cookie that you get in a Chinese restaurant in the United States. They had no idea what that was.
No. Or Zhuozhongtang chicken.
Yes,
for that matter.
No, yeah, exactly. That we thought, what? You don't know what a fortune cookie is? But it doesn't exist in mainland China, right? So it's you can imagine, I think from what I'm saying, you can sort of imagine how I became hooked on this, because it was at the same time very surreal, being at a strange, very, very strange.
Very strange. I mean, the two mislocated universes.
Yes.
Even though you're speaking Chinese, they're speaking English.
Right.
1986 was quite a year. Not least because of the student movement for democracy, and Fang Lizhi was making speeches in Anhui. Did you see any of that?
I never met Fang Lizhi. I did meet Perry Link during that time. But I know that was later. I think I didn't meet him until
89.
Yeah, until 88 or 89. Yeah. I can't remember. Yeah, and I think I met him actually at Michigan. But anyway, he was there. We met up many times at Michigan. We met up many times in Beijing. Fang Lizhi I never met, but I did meet with these graduate students at Beida and Renmin University and Tsinghua who attended his lectures and stuff like that. Yeah, it was really exciting, very open. Everyone was very optimistic. I remember, but they were very Western oriented, especially the young people. And also very negative toward China. There was a sense of cultural inferiority. You know, to the point where, I mean, if I said anything good about China, they would say, no, we suck, or the equivalent of whatever we suck would have been. No, I mean, I could not say anything good about China. And said, no, we want to learn from you. And also, they would have these shalong, because Wenhua shalong, at Beida and all these different things. And they were open, you could go to them, and it's hard to imagine this now. Yeah. But you could go to these, Wenhua shalong, and they're talking about democracy, and they're talking about making changes, and And also, a big topic was what happened to us? How did China fall so far? And the same kind of May 4th debates still going on at Beida at the same place and the same question. And what did we do wrong? And how can we get out of this, right? But I mean, this was just amazing to me. And I say I probably learned more in terms of just, bits and bytes for those first few years, because it was so intense. And also people were so open with you. They would talk to you, about anything you wanted to talk about, but they were everything was passionate, but also optimistic. Although they were down on China in some ways, it was only going to get better after that. So it was it was really, really exciting. And after the translation took much longer than we thought it was going to take. So, but for me at that point, I said, maybe I'll just quit my music career totally and just go into get a PhD and do this. So that's did it. But the reason I did it is that I suddenly realized, wow, this is something that can really grab my attention, my full devotion or whatever, and put my life into it, because I just thought. Also, I felt back then very, very strong that I liked the feeling of being a bridge. I liked that feeling. I thought that that's what I was born to do, to explain the U.S. to these very enthusiastic Chinese people, and then also to explain China to my friends and people back home, and even when American students would come, I just liked that. I don't know why. I thought, and to this day, I think that's probably the thing I'm proudest of, and the thing that I really passionately care about. I think there's something about this, my feeling of having a very early connection with China and the image that I had, and also being somewhat probably very American. I think I'm a very American person, but on the other hand, I'm also typical of my age group, that I also have a kind of distaste and disappointment and hatred of America. It's like this rebellious 60s hippie generation, something like that. So I sort of felt like these are two cultures that sort of needed each other. And I could be in the middle there, kind of, what's the word? Making it more efficient. What would you say? Help me with my English. What do I want to say?
I don't know.
Intensify it or augment
almost like
it.
A lubricant.
Yeah, like a lubricant, and augment it or something like that. I could play that role. Because back there weren't that many foreigners anyway,
And so you spent some time in China and then came back to the U.S. for masters and...
Yeah, I decided that I wanted to do... It's a little more complicated whether I was going to do it at Indiana or in Michigan. Yeah. But at that time, the woman I was living with got a promotion, or she was Douglas Hofstadter's graduate student. So I was very incestuous world there, and he was going to move to Ann Arbor, Michigan. So then I did too. So I ended up getting my master's and PhD at Ann Arbor. But it was great because the Chinese Studies department were very liberal about. They said, you don't have, I said, Dad, do I have to spend my whole time here for undergraduate? I said, no, you can go back and forth whenever you want. I mean, there's some things you can take in absentia, or you can do certain things there. And of course you can write your theses there and stuff like that, So I ended up from I'd say 1986. And then really right away I started getting my master's there. 87, 88, but going back and forth the whole time.
Oh, while doing the translation?
Yeah, because the translation was more complicated than any of us had thought.
Okay.
And they actually had to ditch the original and just restart.
I mean, they had like all kinds of different translators in charge of different parts, and you're supposed to piece them together and with quirky English expressions.
That's right. So you had 5 different translators, all with totally different styles. And also, so there was no unity to the book. And also some of the translations were very literal. And the reason that Doug Hofstadter wanted me to go there is he didn't want that kind of translation. He wanted a translation that would be accessible to just the average Chinese reader and feel natural. So his thing was revise the whole thing, and instead of using only American cultural examples, use a Chinese cultural example.
So you need to help him rewrite part of it.
Right, and there's lots of wordplay. So we spent a lot of time working on it was like translating Alice in Wonderland or something into the other. You can't just do a literal translation. You have to reconstruct the jokes or reconstruct the wordplay or whatever it is in the native language, right? So we spent a lot of time doing that. And we were working with Commercial Press, which is one of the most prestigious publishers in China.
商务印书馆.
商务印书馆. And by the way, as far as I know, this Gödel Escher Bach, the book, was the first book to be typeset on computer. Which is appropriate since it was a book about AI, right? But also because Zhou Xiang Shijie, that little booklet, right? Doug calls it a Geblet. G-E-B is his book.
Yeah.
Geblet. A lot of people had read that book, so they were very interested in the translation. And so...
Well, no pressure there.
But, well, the pressure for me was, imagine this. This is before the internet, or the internet was there, but I mean, before digital technology, we have, Pleco and different Chinese dictionaries and things like that. There were nothing like that. So everything was books. You had to look up characters by doing the radical lookup, right? And yet, and I had only been studying myself for several years, and not full time, but I picked it up pretty fast, and my tones were pretty good because I was a musician, right? So I could always hear the tones fairly well, right? Okay. But when they said, okay, we start to work, and they would plop this stack of pages in front of me, this Gojer, the squared lines with characters in each little square, right? Handwritten. Imagine this, right? I mean, even now, I mean, you can't. It's hard for me to read handwritten Chinese script, right?
And everyone has their own style.
So that was a great sort of, I guess it was a good opportunity because I got really good, or not really good, but better than most people in being able to read Chinese people's handwriting. Because I had the code, I said, what in the world? But I had the Yuanwen, I had the original text. So it said, computers will take the role of, okay, so computers, there must be the word 计算机 in here. And so I'd search, this looks like it. Yeah, 计算, you can write it that way.
Well, that's a great way to learn a language.
And it was the best way to possibly learn the language. First of all, I'm getting Shu Mianyu, the text, plus the writing, and then plus translated back into oral speech, because then I would be talking about it. So I was getting all three of these things. And that's a kind of a crash course in Chinese that most people don't.
No. But yeah, if you can get it, I mean, that's marvelous. And back in Michigan, I mean, that was the time of, the so-called Michigan Mafia, right? I mean,
Kenneth Lieberthal, Michael Oxenberg, yeah, right.
Did you study with him at all?
Yeah, I did, yeah. I mean, I took some, what do you call it? Seminars. I didn't take courses from Oxenberg. Lieberthal I had some interaction with, but there were other people there too that were, literature experts. Michigan's a very good Chinese school.
Yeah.
And they had a very good Asia library, and they still do.
I mean, Jean Oy was there.
Yeah, that's right.
Elizabeth Economy was there.
Elizabeth Economy, yeah.
David Shanbao
was there for a while, only for a couple of semesters. I took his semester under him.
I mean, what's the magic of Michigan? Why Michigan?
I don't know. I'm not sure why. It might be their library. It might be, well, it could be. I'm sure that Lieberthal and Oxenberg had a lot to do with it.
Of course.
It was a very liberal kind of. They were very, what's the word? Tolerant, loose, experimental. They were willing to let you do a project that was kind of unorthodox, and they just, like the what do you call it? The course list, the listing of courses. Were very varied. You could take, I was taking courses in psycholinguistics and psychology, and in ancient Chinese, in classical Chinese, and other kinds of things to that would help me with this book. And they said, great, yeah, fine, and my thesis was very multidisciplinary. It had to do with linguistics and psycholinguists and Greek,
what's your thesis
ancient
about?
Greek. It was a philosophy thesis, really, but it was about how, or it was a speculation, but I was, coming up with some proof for it, that the Greek philosophical obsessions, or the Greek philosophical focus had a lot to do with the Greek language, which is Indo-European language, and that their emphasis on abstractions and logic and stuff like that just fell out of the language. Whereas the Chinese, not that they would normally have been interested in that sort of thing anyway, but the fact of the Chinese language, that there was no marked forms in the Chinese language to call attention to things like abstractions, right? So I mean, I could go on about that, but
that's interesting.
yeah. If here's just a simple example. So the Greeks have suffixes and prefixes, or really suffixes, like we do to indicate abstract nouns. So when you say, this is good, this goodness, so one is good as an adjective, and you say goodness is an abstract noun, right? Because it's ness, right? So then I can do that, oh, this movie has a lot of Americanness about it, or this thing has a lot of, Ann Arbor-ness,
right?
Or you can use that ness to create abstract nouns, and you see it as a different word. So, but if you don't have that suffix, then you might just think, you might not even notice that you had a word class difference, right? So if you say, he is good, his goodness knows no bounds. You say, that's a different word, and that's an abstract noun, and that's a property. But if you say, he is evil, his evil knows no bounds, there's no morphology, it doesn't change, right? So if you just are focusing on a folk kind of understanding of language, there's no reason why you would say, hey, I wonder what this other word really means. So for the Greeks, they were trying to figure out, the ontology of the universe and logic and all this stuff. And where do you go when you don't have the slightest idea what? You go to your language, because your language tells you, So the Greeks said, aha, we know that this is white, but what is this thing called whiteness? And they had the same thing we do, which is a suffix that, and they would say, well, this is a horse. What about horseness, right? So then go to the Chinese world, and I was studying the Mozi, the Mo Bian, They would also ask these questions and talk about it, but there was nothing in their language that could clue them in that there was a difference there. So, for example, they had these are this Moist group that were studying logic and stuff, a little bit similar to the Greek obsessions, but they would say what we would translate as the circularity of the small circle is the same as the circularity of the large circle. Right? They both have the same circularity, even though one is small and one is large, right? So in classical Chinese, though, in these texts, the way they write it is 大圆之圆, 小圆之圆,
Okay.
同也, or something like that, right?
Okay.
Now, they would understand it because that's the way Chinese works. You by context, you understand psychologically that it's an abstract concept, not the specific thing of it.
But you need to fill in the blank for the author.
But there's nothing that screams out to you, hey, pay attention. This is a special word you're looking for. There's nothing there, right? So they understand and are able to do the logic, but there's nothing in the language that would cause them to get curious about these other.
Okay.
All right. So this is the kind of thing my thesis was about. So it was involved ancient Greece, ancient Chinese, modern Chinese. I did some modern experiments at counterfactual thinking back then, and it was great fun. And I learned so much. But it was only at University of Michigan could I probably have done that, because they said, this is such a hodgepodge of different things. But yeah, whatever, go ahead. So
what I'm hearing is that by the late 80s and the early 90s, a certain image of the great learned American is emerging in your life, right? You're good at music, you're reading Chinese classics and comparing Chinese classics to the Greeks, and you're doing multidisciplinary works on linguistics, and you're talking
starting
to
learn
Chinese,
Xiangsheng at the
and starting to learn Xiangsheng. And I wondered, where this conception of, how you want to be come from. Is it the counterculture? Is it the family life? Is it your grandparents? Is it something in the air of the 80s?
It might be attention deficit disorder. I just can't concentrate on one thing at the same time. No, a lot of people, I think I was always kind of like that, but a lot of people call me 杂家, 莫老师你是个杂家, meaning you just do everything. You're interested in everything.
Oh, the polymathic
like
model
yeah,
of Hofstadter.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one reason Doug Hofstadter and I hit it off so well as close friends, because he was the same way. I mean, he in fact, if you think I'm interesting, he's me on steroids. I mean, he's got not just 2 languages, but 10 of them.
And he was trying to learn Chinese too.
Right, it still is, yeah. So anyway, I think that's a very American thing. A Chinese student couldn't be so multidisciplinary, in that you're supposed to concentrate on one aspect and dig into it and be an expert on it. In the U.S., you're sort of encouraged to be a little bit more cross-cultural, multidisciplinary.
I mean, the Chinese education tells you to focus ever since you were 3, and you're supposed to focus on one thing.
That's right. In the U.S., it's the most common thing in the U.S. is to change your major, when you're halfway through your undergraduate, but not in China, right?
No.
So I came from this American, sort of paradigm that, you can study lots of different things. But
so how did Xiangsheng land on your desk?
So I was trying to improve my Chinese, because my Chinese was terrible. I mean, it's amazing I could even do anything, because my Chinese was just, even now I don't think my Chinese is very good. But I was looking for something that could be a teaching aid or something, because back then all the Chinese pedagogical books and textbooks for foreigners were really boring, unbelievably stupid and boring, right? I didn't even bother I never bought a single one. I'm totally self-taught. I never took a class in Chinese at all. But I wanted something that was real and interesting and something. And my friends, one of the translators said, "Oh, you should listen to Xiangsheng, because it's very challenging, but it's also interesting, and it's filled with Chinese cultural aspects and languages and dialects and history and all this kind of stuff. And I think you'd enjoy it, And so I did. I bought, some back then Sidai, this cassette tapes. They didn't have Hei Jiao Changpian, record albums, and they didn't have CDs, certainly. And I also did, so I sort of devised my own thing using Xiangsheng, which was, I would ask one of the students, could you transcribe this Xiangsheng dialogue for me? Just write it out, and they could easily do that, And I was used to reading handwriting anyway, so I could do that, right? As a favor, and then maybe I'd take them out to dinner or do something, So I got a bunch of Xiangsheng transcriptions from the tapes so that I could understand them better.
Oh, so you were reading Xiangsheng?
I was reading it, yes. I was very conscious of how to do a syllabus, how to do a course of study. And for me, I absolutely actually had to have the text to look at, because otherwise I'd only understand maybe 20%, 50% of it, right? But if you want to get every single joke, everything, you've got to have it looking at it, right? So I taught myself using this while I was at Beida. And at the time I met, at that time Da Shan was already famous. He was 1988 when he became the biggest, foreigner star in the world. Yeah. And the person who had who discovered him or recommended him to the TV station was a professor in the Chinese department at Beida named Wang Jingshou. And he was an expert in Qi and had written books about it. And he knew all the Xiangsheng people. Back then, it's a very small world, right? Yeah. He was the professor, and they were all the... So he and a very funny guy. Funnier than any of the Xiangsheng performers. He was a very funny guy. He could do Danko Xiangsheng and just fall on the floor laughing at him. He was so funny, jolly, fat. But anyway, so... I met him, and he was so excited that a scholar, a foreign scholar, wanted to learn about Xiangsheng, because that's almost nobody studies that. So, he said, "Great, fantastic. What do you want from me? What can I do for you?" I said, "Well, I'd like to interview some Xiangsheng performers and see, how their craft and learn about it." "No problem." So like the next week almost, I had people like Jiang Kun and Tang Jiezhong and some other Xiangsheng performers, Li Jindou, something in my dorm room at
Ma Ji.
Ma Ji, yeah, right. Later on, Ma Ji, in my dorm room, and I had no idea what these people were.
These are household names in China.
Right,
We
exactly,
grew up
right.
listening and
That's
hearing
right.
them.
And I
Their
had no
voices,
idea.
the sounds are as similar as some of your relatives, maybe.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But I had no idea. In fact, I was surprised they would come in their limousine or whatever, and they would go up to this dorm room, and the Fuyuan in the hallway would go, "Ah, Ma Ji," and I was, who, what? But that was great too, because I actually recorded all those, so I still have lots of cassette tapes
fantastic.
with recordings.
Oh, that's really good.
And some of them were telling me about performing Xiangsheng for Chairman Mao at Zhongnanhai. Oh. There was Hao Aimin, is a Xiangsheng performer, not that famous, but he used to do every Saturday Xiangsheng performances for Chairman Mao at Zhongnanhai.
That's really cool.
And so I still have these things.
Yeah.
I was doing about 10 things at once, writing a thesis and doing all this and this translation.
And learning Chinese from Xiangsheng is not too different from the Chinese trying to learn English by watching Big Bang Theory and the Friends.
Chinese know how to do it, right? That's why your English is better than my Chinese, because you did it. you did the right thing from the very beginning. Yeah, right.
Wow. And then when did it occur to you that you could actually perform Xiangsheng?
Right. Was this same professor, Wang Jingshou. At that time, I think I had already met Da Shan, by the way, because he lived in the same. There's a foreign dorm there in Beida called Shaoyuan, and we both lived in that dorm.
Oh, he was living in Beida too?
Yeah, right. He was getting a master's degree, but he never got it.
Okay.
So anyway, we met and we talked a little bit and everything. So I knew him, but Wang Jingshou said, "Da Wei," that's why it's Wang Jingshou. "Da Wei, 你可以上电视." I said, "No. I'm a Shudaiza. I can't do it. No." I said no many times. "No, can't. Come on, don't be silly." He said, "No, you can do it." So he started recommending me to TV stations, and I think the first skit thing I ever did was with Hou Yaohua.
Yeah.
哪位是侯导演？
我就是，什么意思？
侯导演。
And somehow I did it. I mean, I didn't understand the script, but I worked really hard at it. And the first time I was on TV was with him.
And it is really funny. I watched it just now.
听说你们正在拍一部电影，
啊，是，
需要一个外国人，
啊，对，
我毛遂自荐，来当演员。
Zhang Guoli was the director,
That's right.
wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I met him at that time too. Yeah.
Do you know him? I mean, he's like the biggest star in that era.
I think it was a little bit later, because I don't think
Slightly later, yeah.
he hadn't done playing emperors and things like
Di
that.
Xiaolan.
He was
Di Xiaolan
kind
came
of
a bit later.
Yeah, he did bit
Up and
parts.
running.
Yeah. He was very young back then,
Yeah.
And Hou Yaohua.
So you were being rolled into this world of TV performance, entertainment.
Now that performance, I was really scared. Really, really scared.
I mean, Hou Yaohua is obviously one of the most experienced Xiangsheng people on earth, and there you were, first time performing.
Never performed, and was insecure about my Chinese for sure, and all that kind of stuff, And also, he didn't like to rehearse. He would just go through it once. He said, 差不多, okay, no, 没问题. He said, 没事, 你说错了, 我来这个那个拯救你. Yeah. The guy is very professional and everything. I just kind of didn't like his personality in some ways, but it still is an honor to work for him. I mean, he's just amazing, So that was the first time I performed, and then after that, then more into the Xiangsheng world, and then I only later on met Ding Wangquan.
How did you meet him?
How did I meet him? Good question. I can't remember. How did I meet him exactly?
I presume he was having quite a few foreign students already.
Yes, he already had several foreign students at that time. Yeah, Da Shan was one, although Jiang Kun was actually his formal teacher. So that's how. So it gradually, I met. I can't remember how. I think it was because Wang Jingshou, Ding Guangshan needed another foreigner for a skit, and I can't remember the skit, but he needed, and so he called me up and said, I'll help you meet them, and we did the skit, and then after that, then he knew who I was, and so he started calling me, and then I took him as my formally took him as my teacher
Yeah.
in 1997, I think, maybe 1996, I can't remember, where we had the whole Bai Shi Yi Shi, and that kind of stuff.
Where were you living in Beijing back then?
Beida.
Still in Beida?
The whole time in Beijing.
And this would be after your PhD, wouldn't it?
Yes. I think I'd just gotten it. So I think 1994 I finished it. I'm not sure if I got the actual diploma then, but yeah, I think it was around that time, yeah.
And you were working as a translator for Sheke Yuan?
Actually, up until 1994, we were still working on the book, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah, almost like 8 years.
8 years on, yeah.
Yeah, because we started from scratch in '86, and then there were, I don't even want to get into it, but there was all kinds of trouble because it had to do with, the book was so complicated that commercial press, the Xiangsheng Institution, didn't want to do it. I think at least there was some editor there who just thought this was crazy, it was too complicated or something like that. So we had to like bribe people to get the book published finally, and it's a good thing we did because it's to this day it sells. It's a classic book in China, right?
Yeah.
Still very famous in China, and as all his books are now, he has a fan base.
So that's all for today. If you'd like to hear more episodes like this one in the future, do subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to them, or follow us on Substack, where you can also read our conversations and join our group chats with all the other lovely people. So that's it for today, and I'll talk to you next time.